I remember there was a couple spots in the game, if you were to like stand on a button and get the cube through the door, you can't get your cube back. We had to put in like special detection to know when that happened.
You missed a spot. Soft locking a game is the act of entering a state where, although the game technically continues to run, progression is impossible. This typically occurs when the player becomes permanently trapped, or when a bug in the game's code causes an infinite loop. But in the mid-2000s, the developers of Portal faced a unique problem. In a game where the goal is to solve puzzles, what if you break the puzzle? Valve was aware of this issue and needed a way to prevent the player from becoming soft-locked. When I first played Portal as a kid, I used to think there was some kind of algorithm that would cleverly detect when the player became stuck. In reality, the level designers had to manually account for situations where we could become soft-locked. And this raises the question, how successful were they? Today, we'll examine the game's 20 test chambers and 3 escape areas to find out how many anti-softlock mechanisms were put in place. And perhaps more interestingly, how many softlocks remain in the game undetected. Editing this video has been a monumental effort, so I'd like to thank Raycon for sponsoring today's video. Raycon's everyday earbuds provide a premium audio experience at half the price of other brands. The gel tips have been optimized for both fit and comfort, so they feel great to wear no matter where I take them. And with the everyday protective case, they remain even more durable against the wear and tear of daily life. The new version of the everyday earbuds provide 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. On top of that, Raycon offers wireless charging, active noise cancellation, water resistance, and more. The entire feature set is very impressive at this price point, especially right now with Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales. If you want your own pair, click the link in the description, or go to buyraycon.com/Marblr to get up to 30% off your order. It's a great way to support the channel, and thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Before we go searching for softlocks, there's something very important that needs to be established. Portal is a broken game. If we were allowed to use all of the game's various exploits, it would be trivial to simply go out of bounds and softlock anywhere. In order to provide a fair analysis of each chamber, we'll be playing with one rule: no glitches. Since classifying what does and does not count as a glitch can be surprisingly difficult, we'll be following the glitchless rule set on speedrun.com. Every softlock found in this video must be possible without using any of the exploits or techniques listed here. Now that our ground rules are in place, let's get started. The game begins in Chamber 0 with the simplest puzzle possible, placing a cube on a button. We're immediately presented with a classic softlock scenario where the cube becomes irretrievable if thrown through the exit door. There is some softlock detection in place here, but it's a bit strange. The fizzler will explicitly inform the dropper to dispense another cube if it fizzles the player's current cube. Doing this actually plays some unique dialogue that most players have never heard in-game. Simply throwing the cube is nowhere near enough for it to reach the fizzler, so we'll have to get creative. By leaning the cube against the door at an angle and opening it, the cube will fall in between the door and prevent it from closing. At this point, the cube is under immense stress and will eventually fly out with extreme velocity. The direction the cube gets launched is completely unpredictable, so it often won't go where you want it to. But with a good stuck launch, the cube ends up flying straight into the fizzler, activating the first softlock detection of the game.
Please do not attempt to remove testing apparatus from the testing area. A replacement aperture science weighted storage cube will be delivered shortly.
So there's a lot about this that doesn't add up. First off, why is there even dialogue for this? The fizzler is so far beyond the door that the vast majority of Portal players will never be able to fizzle the cube. Second, this is the only form of softlock prevention in this chamber. If the cube lands in the exit room without being fizzled, the player becomes softlocked. On the surface, none of this makes any sense, but there is an explanation. If we look at a beta version of Chamber 0, we can see that the fizzler used to be in the main room in front of the door. This makes it incredibly easy to trigger the special dialogue, and prevents the player from throwing the cube into the exit room. At some point between 2006 and Portal's release in 2007, this room was redesigned to push the fizzler closer to the elevator. The dialogue was kept intact, and no extra softlock detection was added to prevent the cube from becoming trapped. But this is just one softlock method for this chamber. It's possible to softlock even earlier using the radio from the relaxation vault. The radio can be used to hold the first door open, so when it tries to close after entering the cube and button room, we can jump back through it to the first room. When the door fully closes, we once again become softlocked as there is no way to reopen it. Holding doors open with physics props is one of the many recurring techniques that will be used to softlock in future chambers. Moving on to Chamber 1, we're met with another cube on button puzzle. When the player drops down from the starting ledge, an invisible wall is enabled behind them. This prevents the cube from being thrown back up, which would make the test unsolvable. This is the only softlock prevention in this chamber. The ending room has no kind of detection in place. So, just like Chamber 0, we can lean a cube on the exit door to force it through and become softlocked. Chamber 2 is where the player acquires the portal gun, and this is where things start to get interesting. Skipping the portal gun would be a bit of a problem, since you would have to play the game without the ability to place portals. To prevent the player from leaving Chamber 2 without the portal gun, a player clip brush was placed around this door. Player clip brushes have a special type of collision that allow any object to pass through it except the player. The flaw with this particular clip brush is it doesn't encompass the entire exit area, so it's still accessible from the side. Valve partially accounted for this, since this extra bit of clipping beside the door makes it impossible to air strafe past it using a regular jump. But we have a friend hiding in plain sight. By grabbing the radio and positioning it in a precise spot, we can jump off of it and gain just enough height to air strafe around the clip brush. Now we can enter Chamber 3 without the portal gun, which instantly results in a softlock since there's no way to cross this pit without the use of glitches. Chamber 3 itself doesn't have any softlock prevention mechanisms, since that was the job of the clip brush in the previous chamber. To progress further than Chamber 3, we do actually need the portal gun, so let's grab it and move on to Chamber 4. Chamber 4 is very similar to Chamber 0 and Chamber 1. We can lean the cube against the door to push it past, but this time there are two softlock detections that each trigger different events. If the cube stops inside of this trigger, GLaDOS plays some generic softlock dialogue and opens the door.
Despite the best efforts of the Enrichment Center staff to ensure the safe performance of all authorized activities, you have managed to ensnare yourself permanently inside this room. A complimentary escape hatch will open in 3, 2, 1.
If the cube launches into the fizzler, the dropper will just immediately dispense another cube with no dialogue. In the map file, there's an entity that's set up to play the same dialogue from Chamber 0, but it isn't hooked up to the fizzler, so it never plays. You may have noticed that there's an empty space between the trigger and the fizzler. If the cube comes to rest here, neither softlock detection activates and the player becomes softlocked. This can be done consistently by holding the door open with a detached camera and manually placing the cube in the gap before the door closes. After it closes, you're rewarded with a well-deserved softlock. I'm not entirely sure why this gap exists, but it's a pretty strange oversight that will only become more common as we venture into further chambers. Chamber 5 has what is quite possibly the most infamous softlock detection in the game. When one of the cubes is thrown beyond the door into the ending room, this happens.
You're not a good person. You know that, right?
This isn't the usual dialogue that plays when the player softlocks. In fact, it's a voice line reused from this room during the escape sequence.
You're not a good person. You know that, right?
This is the only softlock detection in the game that plays out-of-place dialogue, which made it a well-known Easter egg early on in Portal's lifetime. Despite its popularity, I've yet to see anyone circumvent this detection and become softlocked. So let's give it a try. Our first point of interest is the shape of the cube detection trigger. It's very flat and very low to the ground. Since this trigger only activates when a cube enters its volume, we can use a different physics prop as a platform to place the cubes on top of. Luckily, there are two cameras in this chamber we can detach from the wall to help pull this off. We'll start by shooting a blue portal into the ending room and placing the first camera on its side. This will provide enough clearance to suspend both cubes above the trigger. Next, we need to bring both cubes to the orange portal. Throwing the first cube up is easy, but in order for the player to get back up, we need to create a staircase using the second camera and the second cube. After jumping up, we're able to grab the second cube and begin placing both cubes on top of the camera in the ending room. It takes a bit of patience, but once the tower is stable, we can move the blue portal out of the ending room and become soft-locked. There's no conceivable way this would ever happen to a regular player by accident, but that's what makes it so amusing. It's fun to push each chamber to its absolute limit and softlock using the most ridiculous series of events imaginable. Which is why it was disappointing to find out that chambers 6, 7, and 8 don't have any softlocks or softlock preventions. Puzzles with energy pellets aren't prone to soft-locking since orb launchers periodically respawn the orb if it becomes abandoned. There's no known method of causing an orb launcher to stop dispensing new orbs, and if there was, it would almost certainly be considered a glitch. But let's say there was a way to permanently lose the orb without the use of glitches. Even then, each of these chambers can still be completed. Chamber 6 can be solved by shooting a portal on the ceiling above the victory lift and walking onto it. Chamber 7 can be solved with a tricky fling to the exit elevator. And Chamber 8 can be solved by jumping off of this metal block straight to the exit.
Very impressive.
So far, softlocks have only been possible where there are cubes and doors. Oh look, Chamber 9 has cubes and doors. If the cube ends up behind the door and the player returns to the dropper, the trapped cube will be deleted and a new one will be dispensed. Looking at the shape of the detection trigger, there's an empty space between it and the fizzler, just like Chamber 4. By holding the door open with the cube, we can jump through and take the cube with us. Now we could leave the cube between the trigger and the fizzler, but there's an even easier way to lose the cube. This fizzler does not inform the dropper that the cube has been destroyed, so by fizzling the cube here and returning to the main chamber, we won't be given a new one. So with no way to hold the button down, we're soft-locked. Or are we? That's right. After shooting a blue portal into the ending room, there are a couple of frames where you can enter the ground portal before it disappears. This is absurdly difficult. In fact, I couldn't even do it myself. This is footage from Chamber 9's glitchless world record achieved by Sidious. Regardless, this proves that there is a way to complete Chamber 9 without the cube and without using glitches. So although 99.99% of players would be effectively soft-locked in this situation, we can't count it as a soft-lock. But don't worry, this chamber has a far more novel way of soft-locking involving the elevator. When you think about it, elevators are really just vertical trains. In fact, the elevators in Portal move using the Funk Track Train entity from Half-Life 1. This entity is programmed to follow a trail of path track entities by traveling forward or backward between them. The elevator in Chamber 9 is special though, since the path begins partway up the shaft instead of at floor level like every other elevator. This was done so when the player enters this trigger, they can see the elevator arriving before reaching it. The elevator stops once it reaches the path track at floor level, but will continue moving once the player enters the trigger inside it. Both of these triggers do the exact same thing. They each tell the Funk Track Train to move forward along its path. If these triggers were somehow activated in reverse order, the elevator would be sent up the shaft without the player inside. This can be done easily by solving the puzzle normally, going back to the orange portal, and landing a jump shot through this window. Having skipped the first elevator trigger, you can activate the second trigger early to bring the elevator down, then go back to the first trigger to send it up. And just like that, we've become soft-locked as there's no longer a way to progress to Chamber 10. Even though elevators are scripted to load the next map when reaching the end of their path, it will only succeed if the player is within the level transition volume. This check only occurs once, so if we're outside of this volume when the elevator reaches the end of its track, we are permanently stuck in Chamber 9. If we stand at the bottom of the transition volume when the level change occurs, then we do load into Chamber 10, except now we're under the starting elevator, so we become instantly soft-locked. It's a little cheesy, but hey, it counts. Chamber 10 is otherwise devoid of any soft-lock detection, but there is another way to become soft-locked. The layout of this chamber consists of 3 rooms, each one separated by a door that closes when the next room is reached. If we manage to backtrack to a previous room after its exit door has been closed, we can become soft-locked since the door will not reopen. We can accomplish this using a technique called portal standing, where we stand on the edge of the orange portal in the first room, shoot the blue portal at the end of the second room, and walk back through the orange portal we were standing on. Doing this completely skips the trigger that closes the first door. Upon entering the third room, we activate the trigger that closes the second door. Finally, we fall into the orange portal at the bottom of this pit to go back to the first room. Now we can walk into the second room as intended, which results in a soft lock since now both doors are closed. But hold on, rewind a bit. Why does entering the orange portal in the third room take us back to the first room? The portal in the first room is also orange, so what's going on? Interestingly, progressing through the chamber in an unintended order causes this orange portal to swap its color and become a blue portal. To understand why, we need to look at how portals link to one another. Every portal entity has a set of variables that dictate how the portal behaves. The activated field determines whether the portal is on or off. If it's true, the portal is visible and functional. If it's false, the portal is invisible and inert. One way a portal can become deactivated is when it's fizzled. Note that deactivated portals still exist in the same position, just in a disabled state. Next, the Is Portal 2 field determines the portal's color. If it's true, the portal is orange, and if it's false, the portal is blue. Lastly, the Linked Portal field stores a handle to the opposite portal in memory. This is essentially a pointer, and it's needed so the portal can access information about the other portal, such as what color it is. Crucially, the linked portal fields must be a two-way relationship. A portal can't link to another portal without that portal linking back to the original. Because of this, one portal becoming deactivated will erase both portals' link pointers. With all this in mind, let's look at the first two portals of Chamber 0 as an example of successful portal linkage. Initially, there's a deactivated orange portal and a deactivated blue portal in the level. These are called fixed portals since they don't move and have been pre-placed at specific locations in a deactivated state. The orange portal is activated first and scans for other activated portals to link to. It can't find any, so no link is created. The blue portal is activated second and does notice an activated portal to link to. The blue portal tells the orange portal, "Hey, I exist, link to me," and so each portal establishes a link to the other. Immediately after the two-way link is made, the orange portal reads what color the blue portal is and sets itself to the opposite value. Then the blue portal reads what color the orange portal is and sets itself to the opposite value. This was completely pointless, since each portal just set its own color to what it already was. But it's this single operation that allows us to softlock on Chamber 10. Here's the Chamber 10 softlock with portal data shown for the fixed portal in the first room, the player's blue portal, and the fixed portal in the third room. The first orange portal links with the player's blue portal as expected. Shortly after we entered the third room, the blue portal is fizzled, which nullifies each portal's link pointer. Once the orange portal in the pit opens, it notices another active portal in the level and creates a two-way link. As soon as this happens, the first orange portal sets its color to the opposite value of the second orange portal, then the second orange portal sets its color to the opposite value of the now blue portal, which keeps it orange. Both portals work perfectly fine after the color swap, though the first portal retains its orange particle effects. This is definitely one of the more fascinating softlocks, since it abuses a very niche quirk with fixed portal linkage. But we can say goodbye to fixed portals for the rest of the game, because Chamber 11 is where the dual portal device is introduced. There's a door that separates the energy orb launcher from the main room, and it only remains open for 3 seconds when activated. After acquiring the new portal gun, the player can backtrack into this closed-off room and become stuck. To prevent this, there's a trigger that detects when the player has entered the room with the dual portal device, though what happens next is odd. First, GLaDOS starts playing softlock dialogue. 2 seconds later, the door is straight up deleted. 9.5 seconds later, the door is told to open, but since it's already been removed from existence, this does nothing. The door suddenly disappearing is a little jarring, but from what I can tell, this was done intentionally. If I trigger the softlock detection again, but skip the instruction to kill the door, we can see what would happen if the door opens after 9.5 seconds. Once it does open, the problem becomes clear. The door closes automatically after 3 seconds, as if it were opened by the button, which just instantly softlocks you again. This could have been avoided by reworking the entity logic that opens the door, but Valve figured the best solution to a problem is usually the easiest one. And to their credit, it's not possible to softlock in the side room. The starting room is a different story. This room is completely sealed in, so backtracking here after grabbing the dual portal device would result in a softlock. We can do this by flinging to the portal gun using this staircase. Now that we have the ability to shoot orange portals, we can enter an orange portal to go back to the blue portal in the starting room. Shooting both portals up here leaves us trapped with no way back out. There's another method of softlocking on Chamber 11 where we skip the portal gun, similar to Chambers 2 and 3. Normally, the button to open the exit door appears after the dual portal gun is collected. The button is still fully functional before this though, it's just hidden away under the goo. With some speed, we can jump into the goo and press the button before barely swimming to safety. Now we can portal to the exit room and take the elevator up to Chamber 12. Chamber 12 can't be solved with just the blue portal, but we're not softlocked yet. Shooting a portal here will link back to the orange portal from Chamber 11. This is only possible because Chambers 11 and 12 exist in the same map file, so advancing to Chamber 12 does not clear out the entities in Chamber 11. We can enter this portal to go back to Chamber 11 and grab the portal gun. Now when we approach the exit elevator, it's missing as we already used it to get to Chamber 12. Since the elevator will never come back down, we are once again softlocked. Moving on to Chamber 12 for real this time, we're met with a cube, a button, and a door. After opening the door to the exit elevator, we can see some portal surfaces next to the fizzler. If we place a portal here and backtrack to the cube, we can throw the cube through the portal to destroy it, activating a softlock prevention.
Please do not attempt to remove testing apparatus from the testing area. A replacement aperture size weighted storage cube will be delivered shortly.
You may remember this as the same dialogue that plays in Chamber 0 when the cube is fizzled. This is the only other time this voice line is used in the entire game, which makes its appearance here even more confusing. And just like Chamber 0, we can throw the cube into the ending room without fizzling it, which is not detected and results in a softlock. Chamber 13 gives the player control of 2 cubes, 2 portals, 2 buttons, and 2 doors, so there is a ton of potential for softlocking. To complete this chamber, both buttons need to be held down for the exit door to open. Trapping both cubes behind either one of the doors would result in a softlock, so cube detection triggers were added in the starting and ending room. There's a counter that increments by 1 each time a cube enters one of these triggers, and decrements by 1 each time a cube leaves. If the counter equals 2, one of 2 softlock preventions will kick in. If both cubes are locked in the starting room, the first door will open.
Despite the best efforts of the Enrichment Center staff, a complimentary escape hatch will open in 3, 2, 1.
But if at least one of the cubes is locked in the ending room, the exit door will open instead.
Despite the best efforts will open in 3, 2, 1.
The problem with this system is the detection trigger in the starting room does not cover the entire space. If the cubes are abandoned near the entry elevator where the trigger doesn't reach, the player becomes softlocked when returning to the main chamber. This is not a problem for the trigger in the ending room, since it covers all available space up to the fizzler. The fizzler itself increments a different counter by 1 each time it destroys a cube, and when this counter reaches 2, another softlock prevention is activated.
Despite the best efforts will open in 3, 2, 1.
Since the fizzler counter is completely separate from the trapped cube counter, fizzling one cube and trapping the other makes it impossible for either counter to reach 2, so we become softlocked. Merging both counters into a single counter would have prevented this, but hey, I can still respect the effort they went through to detect each type of softlock. Chamber 14 is a very weird map. The intended route has the player traveling back and forth across a long hallway to complete puzzles, even though you can just fling to the exit extremely easily. Despite this simple shortcut, this chamber has multiple anti-softlock mechanisms, all of which relate to the cube in some way. Throwing the cube onto the victory lift would make it inaccessible for the average player, so if the cube is inside this trigger for 7 seconds, a softlock detection kicks in and opens the door.
Despite the best efforts, the escape hatch will open in 3, 2, 1.
The fizzler in front of the exit elevator does not detect when the cube has been destroyed, but again, we can just fling to the exit, so this doesn't result in a softlock. Our only hope of becoming softlocked in this chamber is via the door. There are plenty of portal surfaces behind the door, so we can try to trap ourselves on the other side by portaling across and closing the door. This won't work, however, since this trigger will forcibly open the door if the player steps inside. This trigger stops any potential of becoming softlocked, but there's still one more form of softlock prevention on this chamber that I find hilarious. When the cube activates the button, a trigger that surrounds the button is enabled and checks to see if the cube is inside. If the cube ever leaves this volume, the door explodes. This is probably my favorite softlock prevention in the entire game, due to how over-the-top and heavy-handed it is for such a simple action. I suppose we have to congratulate Chamber 14 for being the first softlock-proof map in a while. Let's see how Chamber 15 holds up. At a glance, Chamber 15 looks pretty resilient against softlocks. The only obstacles found throughout the course are energy pellet puzzles and momentum puzzles, which aren't vulnerable to softlocking. In the room with the first energy orb, there's a lift that lowers and raises the player up to the next room after the puzzle has been solved. Once the lift is done rising, we are fully sealed away from the previous room, and if we portal back down, it seems as though we're softlocked. But alas, there's a backup trigger here that will lower the lift again once we enter it. The only other moving objects in the chamber are these 2 doors in the final room. They can be opened using these pedestal buttons, but will close automatically after 10 seconds. The intent here is to move the energy pellet through the doors, but if we instead fling ourselves through, we end up trapped in this cubby, which activates another well-known softlock prevention.
Through no fault of the Enrichment Center, you have managed to trap yourself in this room. An escape hatch will open in 3, 2, 1.
The escape hatch is a sliding door on the side of the cabinet that opens at the end of GLaDOS' dialogue, and closes once the player steps outside. This is done using a trigger in the lower half of the cabinet that detects when the player exits its volume, ensuring the door won't close while they're still inside. At first, this seems like a pretty robust softlock prevention, but we can actually force the escape door to close early and become stuck in here forever. This is possible due to how the source engine handles the player's bounding box. Bounding boxes are, as the name suggests, boxes that encompass the bounds of an object. Every entity in Portal has a bounding box, and they're used for collision detection with the world, physics objects, and notably, trigger brushes. The player's bounding box is a bit special since it changes size when the player crouches. When crouching on the ground, the bounding box is shrunk downward, but when crouching in the air, the bounding box is shrunk upward. It's this upward shrinking behavior that allows us to softlock on Chamber 15. When the escape hatch opens, we fall down far enough for our bounding box to enter the trigger below us. By crouching, our bounding box shrinks upwards and exits the trigger. This tricks the door into thinking we left, because technically we did, just not in the intended manner. No matter how well you try to design your map, you can never truly escape the Source Engine's sick and twisted trickery. Chamber 16 is where turrets are introduced, but unfortunately they don't have any traits that make them relevant for softlocking. The chamber itself consists of several rooms connected with open hallways, so there's very little potential for the player to become stuck. There is a door and button near the end of the map, but since there are portal surfaces visible while standing on the button, the player is always able to progress, even without a cube. For these reasons, Chamber 16 has 0 softlock preventions and 0 softlocks. Chamber 17 is a vastly different story. Here, the player must bring the companion cube to the end of the chamber while using it to complete several puzzles along the way. The very first room requires the player to use the cube as a step to climb up these stairs. Losing the cube would make it impossible to progress, so it would be a shame if we... Okay, not a great start. Valve at least knew that throwing the cube up the stairs would result in the softlock, so this is detected and will spawn a new companion cube when looking at the dropper. However, the detection trigger for this doesn't cover the entire hallway past the stairs, so this anti-softlock logic is easily thwarted by dropping the cube off past the trigger and jumping back down. The cube has to be left in the hallway for this softlock to work, since the end of the hallway contains another trigger that activates these mini steps back in the first room. Once this trigger is activated, the first room is now softlock proof, since we no longer need the cube to get up. Moving on to the main chamber, we have to solve 3 energy orb puzzles to reach the exit. The exit hallway doesn't have any type of gate, so it remains open at all times. To prevent the cube from being thrown up, there's a push trigger that applies a physics force on the cube while it's inside. This is sort of similar to the invisible wall in Chamber 1, except the push trigger is not solid, so the cube can be carried through it as long as it's being held. We can bring the cube past the trigger by building a camera staircase like the one in Chamber 5 and jumping up. Now we can simply walk into the final room, leave the cube there, then jump back down to leave it stranded. All we have to do next is throw every camera in the level up the hallway to prevent us from building another camera staircase. Although this seems like a certified softlock moment, we technically aren't softlocked since there's a fling we can perform to launch back up to the hallway. Okay, sure, it looks pretty crazy, but just like Chamber 9, we can't count this as a softlock since there always exists a glitchless method to reach the exit. The final area of this map is the incinerator room, which has a door, so you should already know where this is going. We can trap the cube on the other side of the door using the lean, but this is detected and will force the door open permanently.
Despite the best efforts of 3, 2, 1.
Surely there's nothing wrong with the shape of this detection trigger. Of course. This half of the room is not covered, so if the cube lands here after being stuck launched, we're softlocked. But what if the player gets trapped on the other side of the door? Well, we can just jump through the door while the cube is holding it open and wait for it to close. The trigger does not detect when the player is trapped, so now we're permanently locked inside. The oversight surrounding this area might be explained by looking at a beta version of this chamber. Before the creation of the companion cube, Chamber 17 did not have the incinerator segment at the end of the map. Instead, the button opened a door straight to the exit elevator. A softlock prevention is triggered when the cube is thrown beyond the door, but not when the player is trapped behind the door, since the exit elevator is right there. Much like Chamber 0, the anti-softlock logic was not fully updated to accommodate the new level layout. This leaves Chamber 17 with a whopping 4 softlock preventions and 4 successful softlocks. Chamber 18 is another large map that combines every testing element seen in the game up until now. Just like Chamber 15, the energy orb receiver is contained within a cabinet that can only be accessed by opening a temporary door. Locking yourself inside activates a softlock prevention, except this time there's no secret escape hatch. The door will just open itself permanently. The test itself requires the player to cross a large pit of goo to retrieve a cube. Dropping the cube in the goo would make it irretrievable. To prevent this, there's a trigger beneath the goo that will delete the cube and spawn a new one.
Graded storage cube destroyed. Please proceed to the Aperture Science Vital Apparatus vent for a replacement.
However, this isn't the only goo pit in the map. If we backtrack with the cube, we can throw it into the previous room's goo pit. But once again, there's a trigger that activates the same anti-softlock mechanism. It seems as though Valve accounted for this type of chicanery. Or did they? If we backtrack even further, we come across a Ratman den near the start of the level. This hidden area has yet another goo pit, except this one does not have the anti-softlock trigger. Throwing the cube down here will not spawn another one, so it's gone for good. We technically aren't softlocked yet, since we can still progress past the door without a cube. Instead, a camera can be used to prevent the door from closing, which allows us to shoot a portal through the gap into the next room. But it's no big deal. We just have to round up every physics prop in the map and dispose of those as well. Now there's absolutely nothing that can hold the door open. Except we're still not soft-locked since we can just jump into the goo ourselves. After we die, we respawn in a previous state with the physics props intact. Throughout the map, there are triggers that create autosaves for this purpose. All we have to do is avoid touching one of these until after we've disposed of the cube and all props. Specifically, there's one right in front of the door that's easy to access. Once we touch this trigger, we are fully, truly, genuinely soft-locked. Not even the sweet release of death can save us now. We're not done with Chamber 18 yet, since there's one more softlock method that's unique to this map. Every elevator in the game begins moving 5 seconds after the player steps inside, except for 2. The elevator in Chamber 5 and the elevator in Chamber 18. These elevators will only move once GLaDOS finishes her end of chamber dialogue. This wasn't relevant in Chamber 5 because in order to reach the elevator, we must activate the trigger that plays her ending dialogue. In Chamber 18, however, the trigger that plays GLaDOS's ending dialogue looks like this. If we could somehow land a portal on the floor beyond the trigger, we'd be able to enter the elevator while bypassing the dialogue entirely. The intended path to the elevator requires the player to preserve momentum across increasingly tall platforms before flinging to the exit. The fling is what propels us into the trigger, so we need to find a way to skip the fling. Unfortunately, it isn't possible to portal straight to the end from the final platform, since we don't have enough velocity when exiting the portal. In fact, the player's velocity is capped at 1,000 units per second when traveling through portals. Since we're bumping up against this limit already, there's seemingly no way to pull this off. But there's a trick we can use called a re-portal that gives us the extra height necessary to make the shot. And here's how it works. When the player is intersecting a portal and the remote portal is moved, they're given a 100 unit per second push away from the portal. This is intended to prevent portal standing, but as we saw earlier in Chamber 10, portal standing is still possible. We simply have to move our character in the opposite direction of the push to counteract it. But what if we instead move in the same direction as the push? This causes the push to add to our total velocity, giving us a boost. This is called a re-portal, and we can perform one in Chamber 18 by shooting our entrance portal somewhere else right as we cross it. With the extra 100 velocity on top of our 1000 velocity, we're able to reach the portal surface past the dialogue trigger. All we have to do now is enter the elevator and become soft-locked. The elevator will never move, since GLaDOS never spoke her ending dialogue, and there's no way to start the dialogue while trapped in the elevator. Truly a fate worse than death. Chamber 19 is the final test chamber in the game, and actually consists of two distinct segments, the test chamber itself, and the behind-the-scenes areas after the player escapes. Since these are both part of the same map file, everything here will count as Chamber 19. The main chamber is essentially an auto-scroller, where you solve puzzles while riding a platform. There aren't any softlock preventions here, and softlocking isn't possible since the entire platform ride can be skipped using portal peeking, which is very similar to portal standing. Now that we've escaped, the level design and art direction have dramatically changed. Gone are the usual testing elements in favor of navigation puzzles, and the clean aesthetic of the test chambers has been replaced with physics props littered everywhere. But this doesn't mean we can't keep looking for softlocks. There's a section of the level where we go inside of a delivery tube to ride back into an old test chamber. During this ride, there's a segment where we have to go upward, and the way this was accomplished is interesting. There's an invisible platform at the bottom of the tube that rises when the player enters the space above it. Once 4 seconds have passed after it fully rises, it'll move back down just in case the player rides the tube again. If we bring a physics prop into the tube with us, we can use it to block the platform from fully reaching the top, which prevents it from descending. I used a chair for this since it seems to get the platform stuck pretty consistently. Plus, they're everywhere. Once we exit the dropper, we portal back to the start of the tube to ride it again. The platform is still stuck at the top of the shaft, so after we turn the corner and reach the part where we have to ascend, nothing will happen. And at this point, we're soft-locked. It doesn't matter if the chair is somehow freed, since the platform will get stopped by the player while moving down. We can make the platform rise again, but there's no way to get back on top. This all seems very glitchy, but getting the platform stuck with a physics prop is no different than getting a door stuck with a physics prop. In fact, this platform is actually a door entity with a long opening distance. The rest of the map lacks any softlock preventions and softlocks, so let's move on to the next map. Escape Zero is the first map dedicated solely to the escape sequence. This level consists of several open-air rooms the player must navigate using the portal gun. There are no doors to open, no cubes to lose, and no places to become trapped. This map is just pure portaling. Because of this, Escape Zero has 0 softlock detections and 0 methods of becoming softlocked. Escape 01 is mostly the same story, except the end of the map contains a puzzle involving a cube. It's a similar situation to the beginning of Chamber 17, where we use the cube as a stepping stone to reach a higher area, in this case, the vent. Naturally, there's softlock potential here if we can somehow lose the cube. There's a fizzler earlier in the map near the rocket sentry. We can backtrack here to destroy the cube, but this is detected and a new cube will spawn in the vacuum tube when returning. Our second possibility of becoming softlocked is to just throw the cube into the vent so we can't reach it. But this is also detected, so the cube is deleted and a new one is spawned. The shape of this detection trigger only covers the vent and not the area past it. Once we place a portal into the next room, we can throw the cube through and remove the portal. Now we've finally lost the cube, but this area was never soft-lockable in the first place, since we have the ability to fling up to the vent without it. But not all hope is lost, as it's still possible to softlock in Escape 01. We just need to look at the beginning area of the map. These ceiling pistons exist to block off the starting room once the player approaches the turret trap below. The trigger responsible for lowering the pistons is extremely close to the pistons themselves. This makes it easy to activate the trigger and run back before the pistons fully close, which leaves us trapped and unable to get out. Excluding Chamber 10, this is the fastest map we can softlock in the entire game, as we can become trapped a mere seconds after loading in. At last, we've reached the final map in Portal, Escape 02. Similar to the other escape levels, the majority of this map is devoid of anything capable of causing a softlock, but this changes once we reach GLaDOS' chamber. The door leading to the chamber closes once we step inside, which locks us in for the upcoming boss fight. We can't simply leave a portal in the hallway, since walking through the fizzlers will deactivate it. Yes, fizzlers, since there are actually 2 of them here for some reason. Fortunately, there's a small oversight we can use to our advantage. The fizzlers are disabled as soon as the door begins closing, despite the particle effects lingering for a bit. This means there's a brief window of time where we can fire a portal back into the hallway. If we go through and fire both portals, we've become softlocked since there's no way back in. Now you might be saying, let's just die. That would respawn us back inside of GLaDOS's chamber since we hit an autosave trigger. Well, I'm glad you hypothetically said that. It's true that there's a goo pit at the start of the map we can use to die, but doing so will instantly crash the game. Why? Entering GLaDOS's chamber activates a giant trigger covering the entire first section of the map that deletes every NPC and physics object within it. We aren't intended to play around inside of this trigger, though it's generally safe to do so since it's programmed to not delete the player entity. The problem arises when we die. Dying in Portal creates a physics ragdoll like other Source Engine games. It's just invisible, so you usually never see it. The crash occurs because the ragdoll is being spawned and deleted by the trigger at the same time. Since we can't respawn without forcing the game to close, this is a perfectly valid softlock. We can actually use the deletion trigger to our advantage to perform a different but similar softlock. Once again, we slip a portal past the door before it closes, but this time we wait for one of GLaDOS's cores to drop and push it through the portal. The deletion trigger just removes it from existence, so we no longer have a way to incinerate the core and start the boss fight. These are the only two softlocks possible in the level, and the rest of the map lacks any softlock prevention logic. And just like that, we've finally reached the end of the game. Now that every single chamber has been analyzed, let's look at the results. Here are the amount of softlock preventions per chamber. In total, there are 25 anti-softlock mechanisms in Portal. Valve's biggest concern regarding softlocking was, without a doubt, the weighted storage cube, as 18 softlock detections are dedicated to them. It's not surprising then that Chamber 17, the map that puts the most emphasis on a cube, has the most softlock detections out of any chamber. Furthermore, every chamber that lacks softlock detection also lacks cubes, except for Chamber 16, where the cubes aren't necessary to progress. This is all very interesting, but we still haven't answered the question of how successful the developers were at preventing softlocks. For that, here are the amount of glitchless softlocks per chamber. At a glance, there's some nice symmetry here. Chamber 17 has 4 separate softlocks, which is the most out of any chamber, and the longest stretch of levels without softlocks are chambers 6 through 8. Other chambers with 0 softlocks are O2, 14, 16, and Escape 0, totaling up to 7 chambers where it is impossible to softlock. If we're grading solely based on whether or not it's possible to softlock on a chamber, then Portal scores a 30%. But that's not entirely fair. When it comes to the average playthrough, Valve prevented pretty much every major softlock you'd encounter naturally. For most of these softlocks, you really have to go out of your way to recreate them. So although there are definitely some mistakes and oversights throughout the game, from a subjective standpoint, I would say the designers did very well with preventing softlocks. It just so happens that we also did very well in finding them, and if we add them all up, there are a total of 25 softlocks in Portal. 25 preventions, 25 softlocks. A reminder that, although developers and players often find themselves at odds with one another, the universe always settles the score. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a big shout out to all of my channel members, and again to Raycon for sponsoring this video. If you enjoy projects like this, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member or visiting Raycon's website using the link in the description.